In the 90s and early 2000s, there was very little less troublesome than heading out to a video store on Halloween night to rent something scary for you and your friends. But what happens when the videotape you've rented turns out to be something more than you could ever bargain for? Indescribable horror.
There's a chill in the air. Must be fall. Join me for a tale of Halloween. You will experience tales of horror, ghosts, and death. It is not recommended for the weak at heart. Join me for a tale of Halloween. This is Weekly Spooky.
Hello, my spookies. It's October, which means here at Weekly Spooky, it's Halloween. I'm your host and narrator, Enrique Couto, and right here, we're giving you 31 shows to enjoy in 31 days of October. Yesterday, you got to listen to myself and my good buddy David Denoyer talk about the Halloween classic in the making, Cobweb. Well, that was a very scary film, and tonight we have a very scary story. This one is a novella just for you. It's got lots of extra fear for you to enjoy, as well as that fun, nostalgic feeling that Halloween always brings out in me. But before we get to that, I want to say a big welcome to all of you out there who are enjoying Weekly Spooky for the first time as part of your Halloween celebration. You know, we do this all year long. A little spooky in your weekly, no matter what time of year, but right now, we go all out just for you guys who need a little help getting into spooky season. So, if you love what you're hearing here today, make sure you're subscribed, and while you're at it, if you're using Apple Podcasts or Spotify, why not leave us a 5-star rating to show us how much you're enjoying yourself? And if you want to leave us a comment over on Spotify, you can, or you can send us an email at weeklyspooky@gmail.com. We absolutely love to hear from you. Tomorrow's release, by the way, is going to be the first of 3 Halloween story compilations from the 6 years that we've been doing Weekly Spooky. It's a hell of a lot of fun, so if you need a refresher or it's your first time listening, I know you'll enjoy it. Everything else you need to know you can find out at weeklyspooky.com, including our Patreon, where you can get extra content for as little as $1 a month. But now, it's time for the story after these quick words. Erasure by Morgan Moore. Joey McGee, his brother Chris, and Chris's friend Mac walked down Main Street on a crisp October afternoon. As normal, Joey was forced to walk behind them, the other two not willing to admit it, but it was due to them being afraid of being seen out and about with a little kid. They were at the age where all any kid cared about was being cool and in. Joey didn't get it, and usually when he said as such, his parents would say that he would understand when he was older. Chris usually said it was just because he was a 7-year-old baby. Even if he had to stay in the back, Joey didn't mind, since it meant he got to hang out with his brother. They never did anymore unless their parents made them, and Joey missed having fun with Chris. It just sucked that they were out and about with Mac, a kid Joey thought was the embodiment of the big dumb dog from the Tom and Jerry cartoons. Besides, Joey kept reminding himself that while Mac was hanging out with them right now, it wasn't going to take away from their weekend together. Mr. and Mrs. McGee were going away for the weekend to visit some of their extended family. They initially intended to bring Joey and Chris with them. That was until Chris threw a fit, begged, and pleaded to stay home alone. Their mom and dad agreed that it wasn't something they were extremely open to doing, especially with it being the weekend of Halloween, when Lord knows what could happen to their boys, let alone what they might get into. But they also agreed that Chris, now being 12, was old enough to stay home alone, as that was the age they had been allowed to start being left alone themselves. And so they made the decision to let Chris stay home while they were gone, but only under one condition. Joey got to stay, and Chris had to watch him for the entirety of the time they would be gone. Chris naturally threw a fit, but eventually agreed to the condition. Joey was excited when he heard the news. Finally, he could spend some time with his big brother, and maybe the two, away from Chris's friends or school, could finally reconnect. Their parents had even given them some cash so they could rent a movie and order some pizza. It was the movie in question that brought the two and Mac out and walking. They were headed to their local rental store, Binford Video. The McGees had been going there since Chris was little, and while there were a few big-name rental stores around the area, they preferred the personal, homey feeling of Binford's. The trio stopped as they reached the door of the video store. "Well, here we are," Chris said to Mac. "You ready?" he asked. "Of course," Chris answered. "Ready for what?" Joey asked. The younger McGee went unanswered as the older boys gave each other high fives, fist bumps, and friendly shoves to amp each other up. When done, the two of them looked at the video store in silence. "So, who's going in?" Mac questioned. "You mean you're not?" Chris responded. "Why would I be the one doing it?" his friend retorted. "Doing what?" Joey asked again, getting no answer. "Quit being a wimp and go in," Chris commanded his friend. "Hell no, it was your idea to begin with," Mac shot back. "Guys!" Joey shouted. "What?" the two older boys shouted at their young companion. Joey shrank back some at the 2-on-1 verbal attack. "What are you guys even talking about? I thought we came here to rent a movie." "Why does it matter who goes in?" Joey asked, now that he had their attention. "Because we're not just getting any movie, twerp. We're renting Mac begins to explain before catching one of Chris's elbows in his gut. "Shut up," Chris intervened. "No, tell me, I can handle it, whatever it is," Joey insisted. The two older boys looked at each other. Chris sighed and turned his back to his little brother. "We're getting Flesh for the Android. Mac is spending the night and we're going to watch it." Joey frowned as disappointment set in. He should have known Chris was going to have his friend over instead of spending time with him. But while disappointment took hold, a sudden realization came to Joey, and his eyes and mouth widened in shock. But that's a horror movie, an R-rated horror movie," Joey stammered out. "Uh-huh, and we're gonna get it," Mac chimed in. "And you're not going to say anything to Mom and Dad about it. Of course, somebody has to stop being a pussy and go in and get it," Chris explained before shoving Mac. "Oh, screw you, Chris. It's your plan, so you should do it," Mac shot back. Joey watched the two argue and thought. It was one thing that his weekend with his brother was going to be taken away from him. It was another thing that the two were going to get a movie that Joey wouldn't even want to watch. Horror movies scared Joey to death, whether they were old ones with no sound, kooky 3D ones from the 50s, or some more gruesome ones that came out anymore. It was also that gruesomeness that made Joey even more uncomfortable. Chris had been begging and pleading to watch Flesh of the Android from the moment it hit theaters, but while his begging got him his way every so often, it wasn't working this time. Their parents held strong. The movie was rated R, and from what they had seen of trailers and promotional images, was nothing more than a gross garbage heap of celluloid. Everything Chris found attractive about the film, their parents found repulsive. Joey supposed it wasn't too surprising that now that the movie was on video, Chris was going to try and watch it. But from what he was seeing of the two boys arguing, It seemed like neither one of them wanted to go through with whatever it was they were planning. "How are you going to get it anyways? There's no way Mr. Binford is going to rent either one of you a movie that's rated R," Joey asked. "That's the genius part of our plan. We're going to take the tape for Flesh of the Android and put it in a case for a movie he would let us rent," Mac explained with excitement and accomplishment. "Mac, shut the hell up!" Chris nearly screamed at his friend, clearly upset that his little brother now had even more info on their scheme. "What? He was bound to figure out what we did when we took it back to your place. Besides, at this rate, we aren't going to get it since you're too chicken to go in and do it," Mac argued. The two boys fought more while Joey pondered the situation. A light bulb went off in his head then, an idea to get his time with his brother that he desperately wanted. "I'll do it," he announced. The two older kids looked at the younger one and burst out laughing. "You're serious?" Chris asked in between laughter. "Why not?" Joey asked. "'Cause you're a baby," Mac answered. "At least I'm willing to do it, unlike you two," Joey said. The two bigger boys looked at him in annoyance. Joey knew that while they had to be mad for what he said, that they couldn't admit that he was indeed right. While they bickered about who was going to do it, he had volunteered. "Let's say we let you go do it. What then?" Chris asked. "You get the movie you want." "But there's a price," Joey told his brother. "That being?" Chris questioned. "I get to watch it with you two," Joey explained. Chris laughed uncontrollably and was eventually joined by Mac. You're going to watch Flesh of the Android with us." "Get real." "Why not?" "Kid, that movie is supposed to be like the grossest thing ever," Mac told Joey. "You're scared of Frankenweenie. Hell, you're scared of Garfield's Halloween. Yet you're going to watch this?" Chris questioned mockingly. "Yes," Joey stated. "Doubt it," Chris retorted. "Well, I don't think you have much of a choice if you want to watch the movie, unless the two of you grow a set of balls and do it yourselves. Besides, Mr. Binford likes me more anyways," Joey said angrily. Mac gasped and softly laughed in surprise at the younger McGee's sudden exclamation. Chris stared down at his little brother, knowing that Joey had him beat. Chris pulled cash out of his pocket and shoved it into Joey's hand. "All right then, since you think you're some hot, tough shit, you do it. Grab the movie and swap its tape into another case. Simple as that. In and out," Chris explained. "Easy peasy," Joey said. "Uh-huh. We'll see. You don't exactly have a good track record of not spilling the beans or folding under pressure," Chris responded. "I won't this time, I promise," Joey insisted. "You better not, little man, or else your ass will be in some deep trouble," Mac told Joey. "He means it too. If you mess this up, Mr. Binford won't be who you'll be in trouble with the most. Mom and Dad won't even be the worst you could be in trouble with. Not even the police will be, because for all intents and purposes, you'll be stealing. Nah, bro, I will be the one to be afraid of, especially if you rat me out. You screw this up in any way, shape, or form, and I'll make you pay," Chris explained intensely and menacingly to his little brother. Yeah, Joey said as he pushed past the two toward the door of the video store. He stopped and stared into the glass door, hazily able to make out the insides of the lobby. Joey turned around and looked at Chris and Mac. The two of them made a shooing motion with their hands, gesturing for him to hurry up. Joey looked at the front door and gulped before grabbing the handle and pulling the door open.
More scares to come. Weekly Spooky will be right back.
A bell rang as the door to the video store opened, and Joey stepped inside. The interior was the same as it always had been, since Joey and his family had started going there. Walls lined with film reels, posters, and various cutouts of movie scenes and stars. Shelves were placed in almost every nook and cranny, and were organized in ways Joey could only call weirdly specific. The owners, Mr. and Mrs. Binford, were both film lovers and wanted the store to reflect that love. "Well, would you look at that? Joey McGee, my favorite customer," the old shopkeep called out as he watched the 7-year-old walk in. "Hi, Mr. Binford," Joey replied. "This is probably a silly question since you're in the shop, but what brings you in today?" Mr. Binford looked around as if trying to find somebody. "Alone too at that." "Oh, is that a problem? My brother and his friend are outside. I could go get them if you need me to," Joey said with a blush. "Oh, it isn't a problem at all. I'm just not used to seeing you by yourself. So what brings you in?" Mr. Binford asked with a smile. "My parents are away for the weekend, so we're using some of the money they left us to get a movie," Joey explained. "This your guy's first time being left alone?" the shopkeep asked. "Yeah." "Big milestone for kids to be left alone for the weekend. Right in time for Halloween, too. Got any scary movies in mind to rent?" Mr. Binford asked with a grin. The Binfords liked all kinds of movies, but from what little Joey knew of the couple, it was horror movies Mr. Binford liked, especially the old ones. "I don't know. Chris just sent me in to get a movie. Didn't say what he wanted." Joey felt a tinge of pain at lying to the old man. "I see. Well, I'm running a special right now for the holiday. Rent one horror movie and get one with the price slashed in half," Mr. Binford said with an excited menace before slamming a fake meat cleaver down onto the counter. Surprised by the sudden action, Joey jumped back a little before smiling and laughing a little bit, the old man laughing along with him. "Right. I'll have to see if I find anything I like," the 7-year-old said. "Can never go wrong with the classics, but that's a ramble for another time. I'm holding you up while your brother and his friend wait outside." Mr. Binford jabbed a thumb toward the door. The two older boys peered in through its glass. "I'll be up here rewinding some tapes if you need anything, kiddo." "Thanks, Mr. Binford," Joey said before heading off into the maze of shelves. Despite boasting about how he would do it, Joey couldn't help but feel bad about the whole thing, especially after talking to Mr. Binford. He really liked the guy and didn't want to disappoint him. Joey shook his head and took a deep breath. "Come on, McGee, we have a mission to do." Joey walked through the shelves and looked at case after case and thought about his mission in question. It certainly was an easy enough plan. Swap the cassette of Flesh of the Android with another movie. Any movie, and it would look like he was renting anything other than an R-rated horror film. Only problem was trying to pick out a movie to do it with. It couldn't just be any movie. Joey needed a movie that Mr. Binford wouldn't think twice about him renting. He was hesitant to make it be another horror film. Mr. Binford had to have remembered he didn't like scary movies. Renting 2 of them might make him suspect something was going on. Mindlessly, Joey wandered into the action section and looked around. He was about to turn a corner and leave when he had an idea. Joey turned around and smiled a bit as he stared at the case for a movie called Quantum Cop. It was a film he had seen loads of times, and while he hadn't seen too many movies in his life, to make a definitive statement, he did consider it his favorite. It was one that he and his family rented numerous times, and if he saw it was going to be on TV, he would drop everything to watch it. He had toys for it and even acted it out with some of his friends. Most importantly, it was rated PG. Joey knew if he did the swap with Quantum Cop, Mr. Binford would expect nothing. Joey took the tape off the shelf and made his way to the horror section. Like the rest of the sections, it was decorated to its theme, with cobwebs and masks and cutouts of various monsters and other things from horror films. It amped up even more so with the rest of the store for Halloween. Joey was always intimidated by the decorations, but this was worse. Whether it be its cranked to 11 nature for the holiday, or because of what he was planning, he found himself deathly frightened of walking through it. He gulped and started down the path, making sure he didn't look around too much so that he wouldn't see something he didn't want to. The way the horror section was set up, Joey went from classic horror movies up through to current ones, the boxes getting more and more intense as he went along, shielding his eyes as they did so. And yet, you're wanting to watch a gross-out movie just to be with your brother, he told himself. Joey stopped when he came to his destination. In front of him on the rack was a shiny, near-brand-new VHS tape. It was Flesh of the Android. The front cover depicted what he could only describe as a mix between a zombie and a robot, ripping its way through a person. Blood and viscera flying every which way, while the title was printed in such a way that it looked like it had been carved into human flesh. Joey, hand shaking, turned it around to look at the back. While the front had been drawn or painted artwork, Joey was greeted by images from the movie showing the creature chained to a wall and on fire, people looking afraid and huddled together, a scientist with an eye gouged out, and a girl with no shirt having what looked like her chest, but more balloon-shaped, being squeezed while pus oozed out of it. Joey quickly put it back on the shelf and covered his mouth with his now free hand while he gagged. "Get it together, Joey. It's only a movie. It's only a movie. It's only a movie." The young boy gathered his composure and took the film off the shelf. He stared at it and the other movie in his hand. One was a simple and fun action movie. The other contained images that, based on the box, were going to live up to how Chris and Mac had been describing it. Quantum Cop in one hand and Flesh of the Android in the other. Joey looked back and forth between the two. He sighed and placed Flesh of the Android back on the shelf. Afterward, he pulled the cassette of Quantum Cop out and laid it on another movie. Joey then repeated the action for Flesh of the Android before slipping its cassette into the case for Quantum Cop. He sighed after doing so and paused for a second before sliding Quantum Cop into the case of Flesh of the Android. The deed was done. Joey had successfully completed Chris and Mac's plan to rent an R-rated horror movie right under the nose of Mr. Binford. Joey smiled faintly at having completed his task, but could already feel the guilt eating him up inside. "All right, McGee, you did it. Now you just have to check out and get it out of the store." Joey turned around and started back down the horror section. As he walked, he suddenly remembered Mr. Binford's words. "Rent one horror movie and get one with the price slashed in half." The old shopkeep might find it weird that Joey had only grabbed not just one movie, but a non-horror title at that. He began to feel anxiety at how his plan might crumble. Joey stopped when he got to the classic horror section. Maybe if I rent one of these, Mr. Binford won't suspect anything. Joey looked over the movies and blindly picked one. After all, it didn't really matter what the movie was, just that he had another one to distract from the ruse he was attempting to pull. Newly satisfied, Joey made his way out of the horror section and through the maze of shelves and movies until he reached the front counter. After a couple of moments, Mr. Binford turned around from his task of rewinding tapes the customers hadn't. "Ah, if it isn't Mr. McGee, back with some plunder. Let's see what you got," the man said with a smile, holding out his hand for the tapes. Joey returned the smile and handed him the movies. Mr. Binford looked at the two tapes. "Let's see what we have here. Quantum Cop. My, you never tire of this one, do you? With how many times you rent it, you should save up some allowance and buy yourself a copy," Mr. Binford said with his usual friendly smile. "Yeah, maybe," Joey responded. "And let's see, we also have... Phantom of the Opera, the 1943 version, starring Claude Rains. Very, very nice choice here, Joey. It's a personal favorite of mine. I remember seeing this in the theater when I was close to 20 years old and before I got shipped off to Europe, Mr. Binford explained with a glee and twinkle in his eye that Joey never remembered seeing before. That's really cool, Mr. Binford, Joey said. He genuinely enjoyed seeing the shop owner talk about his childhood. Indeed, those were the days. Oh, I'm sorry, Joey, I'm rambling and getting nostalgic again. I'll make sure these are rewound and then get you checked out and on the way, Mr. Binford explained. Joey's mind went blank and then flooded with a surge of anxiety. Rewinding the tapes. That meant Mr. Binford would have to take the tapes out of their cases. That meant he would have to see the cassettes, and that he would see the titles of the movies on the plastic shells. Joey's plan was about to crumble. That would mean he'd get in trouble with Mr. Binford, with his parents, maybe with the police. Worst of all, he knew that when they asked him about why he did the switch, he would eventually crumble and reveal that it was Chris's idea, and then he'd be in deep, deep trouble. Joey nervously stood watching as Mr. Binford began the process of checking the tapes and where or if they had been rewound. He paused at one point and turned to look out the glass door, catching Chris and Max staring in and quickly disappearing when they knew they had been seen by the shop owner. Mr. Binford turned his attention back to his task and started humming while doing so. After what seemed like an eternity to Joey, Mr. Binford turned around, holding both movies in their cases in his hand, and stared at Joey. Joey, we have a problem here.
Are you afraid? Good. Weekly Spooky will be right back.
The young McGee gulped and could feel his heart starting to pound faster and faster. What problem? He stammered out. Well, Joey, you only have one horror movie here. Remember, the special is if you rent one horror movie, you get another horror movie half off. Oh, guess I wasn't thinking, Joey said. Well, tell you what. Since you're my favorite customer, I'll let you have the deal anyways. Just don't go telling anybody. How's that sound? Mr. Binford asked with a smile. Joey felt a wave of relief come over him. He smiled and nodded his head. Sounds great. Mr. Binford smiled and nodded his head in agreement. Joey handed the cash for the movies to the shop owner and watched as Mr. Binford bagged up the two movies and handed them over to his young patron. You boys enjoy yourselves, he told Joey as the young McGee headed toward the door. Joey turned around and waved goodbye with a smile before leaving the store. He walked away to where Chris and Mac were standing. Well? The two asked in both curiosity and simmering agitation. Joey pulled out the case for Quantum Cop, then slid out the cassette that sat inside of it. Chris and Mac looked at the tape and grinned like a Cheshire cat when they saw Flesh of the Android printed on the black plastic in stuttered white. All right! Way to go, Joe! Mac cheered before giving Joey a playful punch. Good job, little bro. Good job, Chris told his brother with a smile. Joey's face grew warm and he smiled, nearly tearing up at hearing his brother giving him praise. All right, girls, let's go get some poppin' pizza and head back, Chris said. Mac and Joey nodded in agreement, and the three walked off towards their next destination before what was sure to be a terrifyingly fun night. After the video store, the boys made their way to the supermarket and filled a cart with soda, popcorn, and everything they needed to make nachos. Once done, they went down the street to a pizza joint called Ha Ha Pizza. They argued over what to get until they eventually settled on extra cheese with sausage, onions, and banana peppers. With pizza and various snacks in hand, the trio headed on back to the McGee's. Once they arrived, the boys got to work on setting up shop for the night. The pizza box got tossed onto the coffee table along with the sodas, while the kitchen became an aroma of salt, butter, tortilla chips, cheese, jalapenos, and tomatoes. Done in the kitchen and with the sun starting to set, the trio headed into the living room with their plunder of buttery, greasy goodness. The older McGee instructed Mac to put out a bowl of candy their parents left for trick-or-treaters and turn off the porch lights so that when the sun went down, they wouldn't be disturbed. With that taken care of, Mac returned and handed Chris their feature presentation. He pulled out the in-disguise flesh of the android and headed toward the VCR. "What about the other movie?" Joey asked. "What about it?" Chris countered. "Aren't we going to watch it?" "As if," Chris and Max said in unison. "Why not?" Joey questioned. "Who wants to watch an older-than-dirt movie? Not us, that's for sure," Chris explained. "What if I wanted to? Mr. Binford said it was really good," Joey said. "Please. As if Mr. Binford knows anything about quality. The man is older than time itself," Max said tauntingly. "Besides, we have more important things to do, like watching this awesomeness," Chris told his companions as he held up the flesh of the android tape as if it was a trophy. "Aren't you scared of these kinds of movies anyway, Squirt? Why do you want to watch that one?" Mac asked mockingly. "I don't know. I guess I just wanted to try Mr. Binford's suggestion," Joey explained as he bowed his head. "Well, we're going to show you real horror. That is, if you can make it past the trailers," Chris said with a snicker that was soon followed by Mac. "Shut up!" Joey shouted as he plopped himself down on the floor in front of the coffee table. "Play the movie." Chris and Mac pretended as if they were intimidated by the youngest of the group before having another chuckle. Chris slid the cassette into the VCR and turned on the television. The older boys settled in on the couch and relegated Joey to turning off the lights. He sighed and reluctantly did so before sitting on the floor in front of the couch. Chris powered on the VCR using the remote, hit play, and the trio waited for the tape to start. Staticky black faded into pitch black before the logo of the video company appeared with its jingle. The boys were then shown trailer after trailer of various movies the company is about to release or has released. Genres ranged from the expected horror to drama to sci-fi and even to romance, albeit of a steamier variety. Joey found the majority of the trailers not to his liking. He had to grit his teeth to make it through the horror trailers, but he stuck through them. If he backed out now because of some trailers, he would never hear the end of it. Once the trailers stopped, the company logo appeared again and gave way to the opening credits. Blood-curdling red splashed onto a black-as-night background. Then the title appeared with a shriek that Joey could only liken to a small dog having its tail stomped on. When the movie proper started up, Joey found himself able to handle it for the most part. Having not seen a lot of horror, it seemed boring to him that there was a bunch of talk about science and not having any viable options left and some other junk about morality and stuff he didn't understand but seemed to make Chris and Mac excited, and what Joey assumed meant embarrassed with how red they got. But once the horror started, Joey quickly concluded that despite how much he wanted to show the two older boys how tough and brave he was, and especially how much he wanted to spend time with his older brother over the weekend, he simply couldn't handle the horror in the film. The way everything looked dark and grimy, the music, and the special effects. By God, the special effects were simply too much for him. From the crazed doctor dissecting and then forming his abomination to how that creature looked once completed and moving around, to the red, oozing blood and the torturous cries of agony. Joey did his best to watch as much as he could. However, when the creature skinned an arm and ripped open the victim's veins to feed on their blood, Joey could take no more. He ran out of the living room hand over mouth. Chris and Mac laughed hysterically while he fled. "I told you he wouldn't be able to handle it," Mac shrilly said through his laughter. That's my baby brother for you, being a big, fat baby, Chris mocked. And like a baby, I think he crapped himself too, Max shouted in humored excitement. The two continued to watch the movie and make fun of Joey as he made his way upstairs. Tears flowed from his eyes, and he was doing his best to not let out the sobbing whimpers building up in his throat. In the safety of his own room, he buried himself under his comforter with his face in his pillow. Then Joey let out his embarrassment and sadness, confident that the two wouldn't be able to hear him now. He screamed and sobbed and cursed what little curse words he knew. Joey swore that he hated the two of them, his brother in particular, for ruining what was supposed to be their weekend together. It was just like Chris to twist everything into what he wanted, and not what others, or Joey, wanted. I hate you, I hate you, I hate you, Joey shouted into his pillow. He turned to stare at the clock on his bedside table. To him, knowing what time it was didn't really matter. It was simply something to look at, to help him fall asleep. He certainly wanted to, but every time he closed his eyes, the images of flesh of the android replayed in his mind, distorted in even more nightmarish ways. Joey cursed Chris for wanting to watch such a thing, but equally cursed himself for getting the tape for them and watching something that he knew he couldn't handle. Their father would say he had polluted his mind and that it would poison him for the rest of his life. Garbage in, garbage out, his father would say. Joey continued to stare blankly at the clock as he sobbed. The red glow of the numbers began to blur from the tears before blurring more so from an inability to keep his eyes open. Eventually, mercifully even, Joey fell asleep.
You're not safe yet. Weekly Spooky will be right back.
A loud thud woke Joey up from his slumber. Dazed from the sudden awakening, he sat himself up and stared off into the darkness of his room. His eyes, half shut, widened quickly when screams filled his ears. Joey turned to his clock. Midnight. Too late for trick-or-treaters to still be out having fun. It could be older kids trying to scare people. Joey tried to think it through logically so that his mind, his imagination, wouldn't kick in due to the influence of the movie. Maybe it's Chris and Mac trying to have more fun at my expense, he told himself. Joey laid back down and closed his eyes. The sound of something crashing followed by shrieks disturbed Joey from his attempt to sleep. He bolted upright in his bed, eyes wide open. The thudding and crashing was one thing. It was the shrieks that had Joey upright and starting to be afraid. They sounded too close to be coming from outside the house, and didn't sound as if they were emanating from the television, which left only Chris and Mac. Are they pretending? Or is it? Joey found his train of thought cut off as the sound of footsteps pounding up the stairs assaulted his ears. At the top, they continued down the hall and only ended once a door was slammed shut. Shocked from the sudden and frantic sequence of events, Joey sat stunned and unsure of what to do. The boy, who was known to be greatly susceptible to fear, was equally horrified at what he had heard, but was also curious. It could well be Chris and Mac simply messing with him as one final Halloween prank and to taunt him for being unable to handle the movie, despite all his boasting. But what if it wasn't? What if something really did happen that was so horrific that it scared even his older brother and Mac? Joey weighed his options and eventually took a calming deep breath before climbing out of bed. He squeezed his fingers into his palms as he walked towards his bedroom door, the only action he could do to keep himself steady in his decision to investigate and not just hide under the covers. Whatever was going on, Joey was determined to not let it get to him as much as possible. You can do it. You can do it. You can do it. You can do it. The young McGee reached his bedroom door and stared at it. Doubt crept into his mind. It has to just be a trick. Just a trick to scare me one more time. Don't let them get the satisfaction, Joe. Just climb back into bed and go back to sleep. Yet, even with the doubt, Joey's curiosity was too much to not indulge in. He unclenched his right hand and took hold of the doorknob. Joey took several deep breaths, turned the knob, and pulled his door open. He stuck his head out. Dark. Nothing but darkness in the hallway. The shapes of picture frames were there, but the images inside were hidden. Not only that, but so was the light switch. Sure, Joey knew where in theory it should be, but with the pitch-black blanket of darkness, it was as lost as those images in the picture frames. He looked to where the stairs were. Nothing, or at least nothing that seemed to be lurking or out of place. Joey turned his head to the other side of the hall where, hiding behind closed doors, were the remaining rooms. A bathroom, Chris's room, and their parents' room, along with a closet. Again, nothing. What's going on? Joey wondered aloud. He shrugged as he continued to stare in the darkness. The door to a room down the hall burst open, and out flew a body into the wall across from it. Joey screamed in response to the suddenness of the event and ran back into his room. His mind screamed at him to hide, but one thought shut down that idea. He didn't know who it was he saw flung into the wall. It could be Mac. It could be his brother. Joey scrambled to his bedside table and opened the drawer under the top of it. He searched frantically inside until his hand found the shape of the object he was looking for. Joey pulled his hand out, a flashlight grasped in it. He pushed the power button on, and a yellowish-white light shined out from it. Joey ran into the hallway and shined the light down where the body was. The light revealed that the body was of Mac. He rushed to the older boy and kneeled down by his side. "Mac? What happened? What's going on?" Joey asked in a frantic manner. Mac looked at Joey, his movement slow and pained. His eyes were partially glazed over and showed to be unaffected by the light being shined directly into them. Mac's lips moved in an attempt to speak, but no sound came out. Joey didn't know much about injuries outside of scrapes, cuts, and bruises, but he had heard and seen his dad care for Chris and himself if they got hit roughly on their head. He remembered the word he heard his father used in those situations. Concussion. Joey set the flashlight down and put his hands on Mac's shoulders gently. He tried to remember everything his father would do in situations like this. "Come on, Mac, stay with me. What's your full name? Where are you? Count down from 20. Who's your best friend? Who am I?" Joey asked each question frantically, but also with brief pauses to try and give Mac an opportunity to answer. Mac's eyes slowly became less glazed as Joey talked to him, repeating each question in no particular order. He stared at the younger McGee and tried to gather strength to speak. His eyes widened suddenly, as if he had awakened in the middle of the night. Not unlike Joey had earlier, Mac stared at Joey and gulped. "Mac?" Joey asked, surprised at the older boy's sudden awareness and expression. "Run!" Mac stammered out. Joey blinked, confused by the statement. Before he could respond, Mac was suddenly pulled away by an unseen force, his body being dragged forcefully down the stairs, screaming all the way. Joey screamed in shock and horror and ran back into his bedroom and quickly shut the door. He ran too and then jumped into his bed, hiding under the covers. What the heck just happened? How can somebody just fly out of a room and then get pulled away? Whatever the answer was, Joey could definitely say that Mac and Chris were not playing a joke. How could they? There was no way they could have done all that. Maybe Chris could have pushed or thrown Mac out of a room, but pull him down the stairs without being seen. Not even with a rope or a cable could his brother do that. Seeing what happened to Mac only moments ago left Joey unsure what to do next. Every fiber of his being screamed in fear and told him to simply stay in his room and hide. Stay unseen, and eventually the sun would come up and all the darkness would be gone. Then he could explore the house and see what exactly was going on, or, at that point, what all had happened. However, Joey knew that as much as he wanted to do just that, there was something that would not let him do it. The knowledge that it was Mac who ran upstairs to hide before being pulled away meant that Chris was likely still downstairs. Joey wasn't sure what had caused Mac to be thrown from whatever room he had hid in, and even less of a clue as to how he had been dragged down the stairs by an unseen force, even with Joey having a flashlight handy to illuminate the darkness. But he did know that meant Chris was downstairs where all the commotion started, and was likely where whatever had taken Mac was now at. Chris, Joey's older brother, one of the people who he loved most in the world, was down on that first story with some unknown being that had hunted down Mac and dragged him downstairs without being seen. Joey crawled out from under his blanket and stared at his door again. He couldn't begin to imagine what was happening to Mac, let alone in general. However, Joey did know that none of it was good, and that most likely what happened to Mac was bound to happen to his older brother. Normally, when the two boys were in trouble or something bad happened, they would turn to their father and mother to help them. They weren't in the house, though. They were miles away visiting family. Joey couldn't even recall who they had gone to see. No phone call would likely bring them back. Chris was in an unknown state, and Mac was likely no longer able to help. That left only one option, and Joey, while aware of it, did not want to admit it. If there was going to be any happy ending to what was going on, it was up to Joey to do it. Trepidatiously, Joey climbed out of bed and walked back to his bedroom door. He was not sure as to what was down there, and even less so that he would be able to do much of anything to either help Chris and Mac or stop whatever it was. But Joey knew deep down that he had to at least try, both for his brother and perhaps even more so, for himself. After all, if his parents, Mac and Chris, weren't going to save him, then he had to do it himself. Just like switching from a tricycle to a bicycle, Joey couldn't rely on training wheels, in this case, others, to help him get along. Joey told himself that was a pretty cheesy and probably dumb comparison, but it was a way to motivate himself. Maybe he needed that silly level of TV sitcom dad pep talk to do what he knew he had to do. Joey closed his eyes and prayed for protection and the courage to get through the night and protect his brother and himself from whatever it was that had come into the McGee's house. The youngest McGee opened his eyes, took a deep breath, and grasped the knob of his door. He twisted it and, with a newfound courage and intent, pulled open his bedroom door and stepped out into the hallway.
There's more scares where that came from. Weekly Spooky will be right back.
Joey looked up and down the hallways for any sign of whatever it was that was inside the house and terrorizing the boys. He couldn't see anything that looked out of place, nor could he see anything that looked like it was moving. Thinking through the sequence of events that had happened only minutes ago, Joey came to the conclusion that, unless this presence had come back upstairs to get him, it was most likely downstairs where Chris was. Joey thought briefly about why it hadn't come back upstairs to get him. After all, whatever it was must have seen or sensed or had some way of knowing he was there when it took Mac. Not to mention that, If Joey's worst fears were true and the presence had already done something to Chris, then why not come back upstairs and finish the trio off? Maybe Chris had ran out of the house, and whatever it was had chased after him. Perhaps it wanted to save Joey for last. Maybe it didn't want Joey at all. All of these possibilities the young McGee thought about. Joey shook his head. While his thoughts were of genuine concern as to what was going on and why this thing hadn't come back for him, he also knew it was partially him trying to talk and psych himself out of going downstairs. Get it together, Joey. You can do this. You can do this. The young McGee headed to the stairs and started to descend them. He briefly considered going back up to retrieve his flashlight, but opted not to, if only because he suspected Chris and Mac had continued to watch TV after finishing Flesh of the Android, and thus the television would still be on and provide some form of light. That, or at the very least, the windows that were peppered on the first floor would allow light from the moon and street lamps to illuminate the house, just enough for Joey to make his way through. Joey continued down the stairs and when at the bottom, looked into the entryway and to the front door. The door was shut, meaning either Chris was still in the house somewhere or he had left and closed it on his way out. If the latter was the case, then it must have been before this thing had gone after Mac. Joey wasn't quite sure which option seemed more likely. He thought about it and how to proceed. Ultimately, Joey landed on continuing to look around the house for Chris and to see what had happened to Mac. Joey made his way toward the living room. There he found, as he suspected, the television was on, its screen a bright blue, the default sign for when the VCR was on, but no tape was playing. Joey looked around the room and saw no sign of his brother or of Mac. However, Joey did see that a lamp had been knocked over, as had the coffee table. Picture frames and other various objects in the room were strewn about. The couch itself had its cushions half off the frame. Broken bottles of pop lined the floors with the glow of the television showing where the fragments of glass were. What in the world happened here? The younger McGee questioned both himself and the room. With the living room empty of his brother and Mac, that left only the kitchen, the downstairs bathroom, and the garage. Of his options, Joey decided to check the bathroom first. Empty, with no signs of a disturbance like in the living room. 1 down, 2 to go. The young McGee walked to the kitchen. Light faintly shined through the window over the sink and the glass sliding door that led to the backyard. With this, Joey was met with a mess. Parts of it were clearly left over from when he, Chris, and Mac had prepared the food for their movie. But containers of flour and sugar, a cutting block and board, pots and pans, dishes, and a nearly tipped-over refrigerator were not something that the 3 boys had caused. At least Joey and the other 2 hadn't caused it when they were prepping for the movie. Did Chris and Mac do this? Or did whatever this thing is do this? Joey scratched his head and felt his brain starting to hurt from trying to deduce what exactly was going on. He could also feel himself tensing up as he hadn't found his brother yet, which meant all that was left was the garage. He turned and looked down a small hallway on the left-hand side of the kitchen. There he saw the outline of the door that led to the garage. Joey gulped and felt a chill run down his spine and the cold stickiness of sweat starting to drip down his face. With another gulp to regain his composure and summon some bravery, Joey headed down the hall, stood at the door to the garage, and clutched the knob and threw it open. Stepping into the garage, Joey was once more met with darkness that was darker than the darkness he had been met with upstairs. How much of his fear was from the unknown, and how much of it was the usual unsettling feeling he always had when he was in the garage? Or maybe the real fear was of not finding Chris in this final room, of having no real answers as to just what was going on in their house. Unlike the other rooms in the house, the garage did not have a light switch to flip. The only way to have light on in the garage was to either pull a cord attached to the ceiling to turn on a light bulb, or to open the garage door and let light in. The latter option was not possible in the dead of night. Joey would need to turn on the light in the garage if he had any hope of actually seeing what all was inside. Joey held his arms straight out and started to walk toward the center of the garage where the cord should be. While walking, he moved his hands in twisting motions to try and find and grab onto the cord. After what seemed like an eternity to him, he found the cord with his left hand. He let out a sigh of relief and yanked on it. Nothing. No light came on. Joey looked up in surprise. He pulled again. Nothing. He pulled a third time, this time harder, and once more. Nothing happened. Joey felt an unsettling feeling flood his whole body, a dread of not being able to search the basement and being stuck in pitch blackness. Along with that, he felt an anger he couldn't remember ever feeling before. In that anger, Joey thought about moments he had seen his father and even his grandfather angry at something that wasn't going their way. "Shit!" he shouted, in the same way he heard his father and grandfather do so when they were upset. Joey thought about what to do next. I guess I could turn on all the lights in the house. I could get my flashlight and then I could see in the garage. With a new on-the-fly plan made, Joey turned to leave. As he exited facing the door, Joey saw a face illuminated in yellowish-white light that was coming from a flashlight. "Joey!" a voice said in relief. It was Chris. "Chris!" Joey cried in joy at being reunited with his brother. He flung himself into him, and the two hugged. "Where have you been?" Chris asked. "Looking for you. Where have you been?" Joey responded. "Hiding. I was hiding for a while in the pantry. Then I remembered you were upstairs, and so I went to get you, but you weren't there. I found the flashlight in the hallway and saw some of Mom and Dad's pictures knocked off the wall," Chris explained. Joey remembered what had happened upstairs. "Mac, he came flying up the stairs and then he... Chris, what's going on?" Joey asked his brother. I don't even know how I could explain it. We watched Flesh of the Android, rewound the tape and watched it again. Well, we tried to. We fell asleep. And then... Jesus, I can't... Just out of nowhere, this thing or force or whatever it is appeared and came after us. I ran and hid and Mac ran the other way." Chris explained as best he could, his voice heavy with terror, something that Joey had never heard before. "What do we do?" he asked his older brother. "I don't know what to tell you, Joey. Mom and Dad aren't here. It's too late to go to any of the neighbors, too. We can't really call the police either." "So, what do we do?" Joey asked again. "I guess just go to our rooms, turn on a light, and then wait until morning," Chris suggested. "And then what?" Joey asked. "I don't know. Let's just get through the night and go from there," Chris said. Joey nodded in acceptance, and he and Chris left the garage. The brothers walked through the house, passing the entryway to the living room. Joey turned his head and saw the television was still on. He stopped. Chris noticed and looked at his brother. Then the TV. Then back to his brother. "What is it?" Chris asked. "Shouldn't we turn the TV off?" Joey said. "Does it matter?" Chris asked in honest confusion as to why his brother felt the need to turn off a television. "I mean, I guess not, but it's something we always do before we go to bed if we've been watching it," Joey explained. Chris looked at his brother. He smiled at the simplicity of his brother's explanation. "Okay, Squirt, I'll humor you. Joey smiled and Chris returned it with a loving punch. The two walked to the television and Chris turned off the VCR and then the TV. Joey and Chris walked out of the living room and to the staircase. Suddenly, they heard the click of both the TV and the VCR turning on and the glow from the television shining into the hallway. The brothers McGee looked at each other in surprise and growing dread. They cautiously walked into the living room and stared in awe at the sight. "How?" Joey started. I don't know," Chris stammered out. Chris grabbed the remotes to both the TV and VCR and powered both of them. He then threw the remotes into the hallway. Not even a minute later, they powered back on. The blue of the VCR screen started to distort in colors. Flesh of the android flickers on and off in its goriest moments, the screen eventually turning into black and white static. Joey and Chris stare at each other in surprise and horror at the scene unfolding before them. They turn their attention back to the television and see the black of the static dripping down to the bottom of the screen until none of it is left, only white. The dust cover of the VCR shoots open and the boys watch in horror as a blackish-brown substance begins to drip out of it. At first liquid in substance, it begins to solidify and become almost transparent. As it solidified, it took on monstrous and exaggerated human qualities. Joey and Chris watched as a black and nearly transparent hand reached out of the VCR and dug into the carpeted floor. In a violent, jerky motion, the hand pulled the rest of the growing form out of the VCR and onto the floor of the McGee's living room. Joey and Chris stood in shock and horror at the scene that was unfolding. Joey tried to gather the strength to say something, but was quickly silenced by the form shooting itself upright. The creature stood almost to the ceiling, and save for its limbs, had no other features recognizably human. Both Joey and Chris saw from the glow of the television that the creature still had a transparent nature to it. However, they also saw that all over the creature's body, it looked as if something was moving, back and forth. Joey, in shocked awe and unable to think of anything else, likened it in his mind to a videocassette being rewound and fast-forwarded. To him, it made sense considering where this thing had come from. "Chris?" Joey started. "Yeah, Joey?" Chris stammered out. "What do we do?" the younger McGee asked. Almost exactly at the end of Joey's question, the creature leaped to the ceiling and began crawling around on it. "Run!" Chris shouted and shoved Joey out of the living room and towards the stairs. Joey looked back toward the room and started to head back. Chris was no longer in sight, but he heard him, and the sounds emanating from Chris were inhuman and the most pained and terror-filled noises Joey had ever heard. "Joey, run! Run, goddammit, run!" Joey began to tear up at his brother's words as he turned around and rushed up the stairs and into his bedroom. He slammed the door shut and moved his dresser and anything else he could get in front of the door as a barricade. He then ran to and slid under his bed. The young McGee curled up in a ball and continued to cry, hearing the sounds of the living room and likely his brother being torn apart. "It's only a dream! It's only a dream! It's only a dream!" Joey shouted to himself, repeating the statement until finally, due to exhaustion and the stress of what was happening, he fell asleep.
If you thought that was scary, just you wait. Weekly Spooky will be right back.
Joey woke up gasping for breath and covered in sweat. He looked around, remembering that he had hid and spent the remainder of the night under his bed. He remembered watching Flesh of the Android until he ran out, nearly vomiting. He remembered seeing Mac thrown and dragged around in the darkness. Chris, not even knowing what ultimately happened to Chris, and that creature, that thing, which came spilling out of the VCR. Joey started to hyperventilate, and felt tears starting to run down his face. The young McGee caught himself and started to take slow and deep breaths and counted back from 10 to rein in his panic attack. When the anxiety was at a manageable level, Joey crawled out from under his bed and slowly stood up. His eyes blink and then widen as he sees that his room, barricaded to protect him from whatever that thing was back to normal. Every piece of furniture, every item, everything was as it was before the horror had happened. Joey turned to look at his clock. 9:30 a.m. Noises. Joey heard noises emanating from downstairs. Was it Chris? Mac? The creature? Somebody or something else? He had to know what it was, and perhaps figure out why his room was back to normal. Joey quickly got dressed and rushed out of his bedroom and down the stairs. Once downstairs, Joey immediately went to the living room and found it not in the state of chaos it was last night, but in a state of ideal cleanliness and organization, just like it was before the boys took it over for their movie. This is surreal. The young McGee heard noises emanating from elsewhere in the house. He followed them. Deducing that the noises are coming from the kitchen, Joey slowly moved closer and closer to the kitchen, readying himself in case the creature was back. His heart drummed fiercely in his chest to the point where he could hear it in his ears over the sounds that were coming from the kitchen. Joey stopped right near the entryway. He closed his eyes and let out a breath before jumping into the kitchen with what he thought was a battle cry. "What was that about, Joey?" an older male asked. "That's certainly a way for you to say good morning, sweetie," an older female said. Joey opened his eyes and found his mom and dad in the kitchen. His father sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in one hand and a pencil in the other. He used it to work on a crossword. His mother was hopping between the stovetop and the fridge in preparing breakfast. "Mom, Dad, why..." "What? I thought you guys were out of town," Joey questioned in utter confusion. "We were until we got home last night," his father explained. "But I didn't see or hear you guys," Joey said. "You were out cold in bed when we got home," his mother added. "What time did you get home?" Joey asked. "Oh, about 11, his mom answered. Joey walked to the kitchen table and took a seat across from his father. His head hurt from the shock of seeing his parents and the revelation that they had been home last night. Joey's thoughts swirled with the possibility that the creature might have gone after them first before Mac and Chris. If so, why? Maybe it was surprising that two people came into the house and attacked them in response, but that left the question that plagued Joey from the moment the horror started and still had yet to be answered. Why did it go after them and seemingly left Joey alone? "Are you okay, sport?" Joey's dad asked. "Yeah, why?" Joey said. "You look clammy," his father replied. "Oh, I didn't sleep that well," Joey offered as an answer. "I think it's more that you ate too much candy and junk food for Halloween. Does your stomach hurt?" his mother asked him. "Yeah," Joey answered. It was the truth, though. Joey didn't think he had eaten too much junk food and was chalking it up to how anxious and scared he had been, and still was. "I think your mother's right then. That isn't to say you didn't toss and turn, but eating all that crud won't do you any favors," his father said. "I guess you're right," Joey responded. Joey looked around the kitchen. Everything was put back in place and clean just like it had been in the living room. If the creature had gone after his parents before Chris, Mac, and himself, then who did the cleaning? Did Chris survive his encounter, defeat the creature, and then clean up? How did his parents come back if the thing had gotten hold of them? If they were back, did that mean so was Mac? It was in this avalanche of thoughts that something struck Joey. Chris wasn't down yet. Sure, it was still the weekend and his brother usually slept in, but their mom was making her homemade biscuits and gravy, and that was one of the few things Chris would wake up for, no matter the time. "Where's Chris?" Joey asked his parents. "I don't know. Who's Chris?" his mom answered, and then asked. The question hit Joey like a freight train. "Who's Chris?" "You know, Chris McGee, my brother," Joey said. The older McGees chuckled a little at what their son was saying. "Oh, Joey, you don't have a brother," his father explained. "But I do. It's Chris," Joey stated. "Oh, Bill, maybe this is Joey's way of telling us he wants to be a big brother," his mother suggested. Joey's father snapped his fingers to what his wife was saying. "That's gotta be it. Are you ready to be a big brother, Joe?" "How can I be a big brother to Chris? He's older than me." "Is this Chris maybe an imaginary friend that you believe is your big brother?" his mom asked. "It's okay if you have an imaginary friend, Joe. We all did. After all, it can be lonely being an only child," his father explained. Joey cannot believe what he's hearing. An only child? How is that possible? I've known Chris my whole life. Mom and Dad know him too. What's going on? Joey stood up from the table and ran out of the kitchen, his parents shrugging at his action. His feet carried him back to the living room and right up to where the family's fireplace was. Joey looked at the mantel above it and the row of family photos. There were the ones of just Joey and Chris's parents, the ones of Joey as a baby and a school photo, and the ones of their other family members. But photos that were supposed to have Chris in them, whether it was of just him or with other family members, were missing. Chris was somehow now absent in all the photos he was supposed to be in. This can't be happening, Joey choked out. The young McGee bolted upstairs to where Chris's room should be and flung open the door only to discover the room was filled with various supplies and stations for his mother's sewing and crafting. Normally, Joey had seen these items in the downstairs office where his father usually worked, apparently having been moved from where Joey's room was after the McGees found out they were expecting. This isn't right. Joey ran back downstairs to the office and found it filled with everything he knew should be there that belonged to his father, and only those items that belonged to his father. No cramped tight space, no room divided by sports memorabilia in his father's work area, along with his mother's sewing and crafts. What the hell is going on? Joey asked the room, finding the situation appropriate for what he was told was a curse word, but frequently heard and saw in church. A thought shot through Joey's mind. The tape. Flesh of the android. The boy walked to where the TV stand was. Joey kneeled down and looked at the VCR. Sweat started to drip down his face. Joey hit the eject button, not sure if he wanted Flesh of the android to pop out, have another movie be ejected, or have nothing happen at all. The VCR made various whirring and clicking sounds before ejecting the cassette. With his hand shaking, Joey took hold of the videotape and pulled it out. He moved it to where he could read the label. His mouth gaped, and a sound of horror and confusion came from his throat. Flesh of the Android was printed in blood red on a bright white label. How? Joey questioned. How was any of this possible? If Chris no longer existed to the point that he wasn't in pictures, or more shockingly, their parents' memory, then that would mean the trio of the two McGees and Mac never went to Binford's video to get the movie. So how was the tape? How was Flesh of the Android here? Binford's video! Joey sprinted upstairs and hastily put on and then tied his shoes. He threw on a zip-up hoodie before rushing back downstairs, through the kitchen, and into the garage. Whoa, Speed Racer! Joey's dad called out. Joey ignored his father as he hit the button to open the garage door. Once opened, Joey hopped on his bike and sped out of the garage, hands clasped on the handlebars with the tape gripped in his right hand. Hi-ho, Silver, away! His feet pedaled harder and harder to build up speed, Joey leaning forward to try and do so even more. Joey kept pedaling down his street and through the town. The 7-year-old paid no attention to anybody on the sidewalks or even traffic lights and cars. He heard the screeching of tires and disgruntled drivers shouting and cursing at him as he rode on. Joey had only one thing on his mind, and that was Binford's video, and he was hell-bent on getting there. Everything seemed as if it could be traced back to Flesh of the Android. But why and how? How was it that a movie played in theaters and had been seen by others on tape, but yet this happened to Joey and his family? Has it happened to anybody else? Joey didn't know for sure if Mr. Binford could give him the answers he wanted, but it was his best chance of figuring out what was going on, if only slightly. Joey approached a hill that, once descended, would take him to Binford's video. The young boy pedaled as hard as he could before beginning to go downhill, letting his momentum carry him down. His left hand poised over the brake on the left handle. Joey winced as he flew downhill, hoping that he wouldn't crash when he braked. When close enough to the bottom, Joey began to slowly brake, making sure to not do it too hard or too fast, and cause him to go flying off of the bike. Just before he reached the end of the hill, Joey gave one final brake, this time harder than before. He breathed a sigh of relief as he successfully came to a stop at the bottom of the hill. With the video store in sight, Joey went back to pedaling and raced up to the storefront. He hopped off of his bike and let it fall to the ground. Videotape in hand, Joey ran to the door, threw it open, and then rushed inside.
You're not safe yet. Weekly Spooky will be right back.
The bell to the store rang as Joey rushed inside and went straight to the counter. Mr. Binford stared at the boy in surprise. Why, if it isn't Joey McGee! What has you up this early and out of breath? The man asked his patron. Joey nearly slammed the tape for Flesh of the Android down on the counter while he tried to catch his breath. Mr. Binford stared at it while Joey composed himself before his eyes shifted to the boy. Joey stared at the elder man until he was back to a relatively normal state. What is this tape? Joey asked. It looks like a videotape for a movie. Horror movie at that, and one which is rated R. I'm actually curious as to why you have it, both the movie itself and why you don't also have a case for it, Mr. Binford responded. No, I mean, what is this tape? Joey asked again. I don't know if I follow, Mr. Binford said in a calm and collected manner. Look, me and my brother and his friend came here yesterday. They wanted to rent this stupid movie, but were too chicken shit to come in and do their stupid plan to swap it with another movie so they could rent it. So I said I would do it, and I came in and I did it by swapping it with Quantum Cop because I knew you wouldn't bat an eye at me renting that again. We went home and put it on, but I couldn't finish it because it was too terrible, so I went to bed. Then, in the middle of the night, my brother and his friends started screaming and running all over the place and woke me up doing it. Some thing got spat out or crawled out of the VCR and attacked us. It did who knows what to Mac. Apparently also did something to my mom and dad, and then I don't know what it did to Chris because he told me to run, so I did. I hid under my bed until morning. But then I woke up to find my house not in the mess it was last night. My parents going about their day like normal, but they don't remember Chris. His room's now my mom's sewing room, and he isn't in any pictures that he should be in. And guess what? This stupid movie was still in the VCR, so what is this damned thing? Mr. Binford looked at Joey as he unloaded the whole story on him. He watched as, when finished, Joey had to catch his breath again and cool off. He hadn't meant to get as fired up as he did, But it was the only way he could think to get Mr. Binford's attention, and he found it came naturally as he went on about the previous day. The elder man looked at Joey, then at the tape of Flesh of the Android, then back at Joey. He took a deep breath before leaning his elbows onto the countertop. "I know, Joey," he said. Joey blinked. "What?" "I know. Everything that you just said. I know it happened. Actually, it's more accurate to say, I knew it would happen," Mr. Binford explained. Joey's face went blank. Then a scowl formed and tears started to bubble up. "What?" Mr. Binford gave a smile, the kind only an older person could. "Let me explain, Joey. I knew exactly what was going on yesterday. I might be getting older and losing some of my faculties, but my peepers work just fine. I saw that you had swapped the movie with Quantum Cop, and I saw how Chris and his friend were acting. I've seen a lot of kids both here and in general over my years. People too. So I know when a person, especially a kid, is trying to do something they shouldn't. So I let you take the movie, and I let them have it," Mr. Binford explains. I don't get it. What did you let them have, and what does this have to do with what happened to us and why Chris is just gone?" Joey asked. "What you saw was an Erasure, or if you don't want to use Latin, an Erasure. It's a creature that has been used throughout history to eliminate things that have been deemed unneeded or for a multitude of other uses. It depends entirely on who the summoner needs it for," Mr. Binford explained like a teacher explaining history or any other subject. Joey stared at the old man open-mouthed and visibly confused. "In simpler terms, Joey, it's a monster that people have used to make things disappear completely." But, how?" Joey started but trailed off. "The monster, once summoned, goes after who or what it has been told to erase, and it does not stop until its task is done. When it erases something, it does so completely from existence and history. In this instance, it erased Chris and Mac," Mr. Binford told Joey. "So that means," Joey started, "they have been utterly erased from existence. That's why your parents don't remember Chris and why he isn't in photos and all of his belongings are gone. The same with Mac's family." Joey wanted to throw up. He felt his stomach churning and his body began the motions of heaving before vomit would be produced. But nothing came up. Joey dropped to his knees while he continued dry heaving and only stood up once he was able to control his body again. That's terrible! Why? Why did you do this?" Joey demanded. Mr. Binford sighed. "Joey, I've seen how people act over the years. There are those that are some of the finest examples of goodness and humanity you'll ever see. Some are so-so or middle of the road. Some aren't the best, but you can tell there's some good deep down. But then there are those you can look at and just tell they're bad apples. I hate to say this so matter-of-fact to you, but Chris was the latter. I've known him since he was little, and over the years I've seen him act like, to be frank, an utter brat. I've seen how he manipulates your parents and how he treats you. When the three of you came yesterday, I saw how they were acting. In particular, how they were when I looked out my window when I was rewinding the tapes. I had seen what the movie was, and once I saw them, I knew what was up. Joey, you're a good kid, a good person. One of the kindest and most honest I've ever seen. I know you would never do anything wrong purposefully, so it was easy to piece together that you had been put up to this. I know you said you volunteered to do it, but I know deep down you wanted to impress your brother, so he would like you more. That is why I gave you the movie." "But how? How are you able to do this?" Joey questioned. "Back when I was a younger man, I served in World War II over in Europe. While we were in Italy, I had found a book containing old dark magic. a combination of my natural curiosity and the pull I've always had to things otherworldly or dark, or horror. I've had an interest in the occult. Once I moved out on my own, I slowly started to practice it. So, when I found the book, I couldn't just leave it there. I put it in my bag and brought it home. I studied it and found out about the Erasure, spell and all. At first, I tried it out on a random drunkard at a local bar. When I saw that it did in fact work, I started using it more. Despite my interest and practice of the occult, I still believe in doing right and being the best you can be. So when I would observe the worst of humanity and felt that something needed to be done, I did something and used the Erasure, Mr. Binford explained to the boy. Joey listened and took everything in. He didn't fully understand all of it, nor could he believe what he was hearing. Stuff like this was the kind of thing he would find in books or movies. Not to mention it was hard for him to believe that Mr. Binford would be into stuff like that, or do something that was so terrible. Erasing people completely from the world to where nobody could remember them, and there were no signs that they ever existed. Joey looked Mr. Binford in the eyes and took a deep breath to calm and assure himself. So, my parents, Joey said, it never went after them. Why was the tape still there this morning? Joey asked. The Erasure was simply placed into the tape by me using the spell. At the end of the day, it is still just a videotape of flesh of the android. Usually, if the Erasure is placed in an object, the object still remains, unless the summoner wants that object to vanish as well, Mr. Binford told the boy. Joey thought for a second and then gulped. So, why didn't it come after me? And why do I still remember him? Joey asked. Mr. Binford smiled sweetly. As I said a moment ago, you are one of the best kids I've ever seen or met. You're as pure and honest as anybody I have ever had the pleasure of meeting. And while you could, in theory, use the creature to go after anybody, I don't like using it for just anybody. Only for those that are examples of the worst of humanity. Or those I think need to learn their actions and character, have consequences. In this case, Chris, and how he treated you and your parents and probably others. As for his friend, well, let's just call that a bonus. Bad apples tend to attract bad apples after all. For your other question, I suppose, if anything, it's so that you can remember how he was and where it led him. I know he had his moments of being good, most likely, but he still chose to be the way he was. Think of it, in a way, as a cautionary tale. Joey wasn't really sure what to think. He loved his brother and had looked up to him even when Chris wasn't being that great. Life without him, especially having the knowledge of what happened, was something Joey didn't know if he could handle. He had just been told that magic and monsters were in fact real, and that it was because of this his brother was gone in every sense of the word. But Joey had to admit that Chris wasn't always the best to him, let alone how he might be toward other people. Still, it was hard to fathom that he would never see Chris again. Joey turned away from Mr. Binford and started to head to the door. "Hey, Joey," Mr. Binford called out. Joey stopped at the sound of his name. He turned around and looked at Mr. Binford, the old man using a hand to beckon the young McGee over. Joey walked back to the counter and stared at Mr. Binford. "What is it, Mr. Binford?" he asked. "Well, I was wondering something." "What?" Joey asked. "You know, Joey, you remind me a lot of me when I was younger. Back when I was a kid, my father got me a job at a general store. I didn't earn much of anything, but it did teach me about how to work hard, and it helped me build my character. So I was wondering, would you like to work at the store with me?" Mr. Binford questioned. Joey was dumbstruck by the offer. "Me? Work here? I couldn't." "Why not?" Mr. Binford asked. "I'm only 7 and I don't know anything about movies. What would I even do? Joey asked the old man. "I can teach you about movies. As for what you would do, you could help me put the movies back and make sure they're in the right spots, and help me tidy up a little bit." "What about how old I am?" "That is true, but I'm sure if I explained my reasoning to your parents, they would understand. Besides, I would make your pay free rentals of any movie you like," Mr. Binford elaborates. "I don't know," Joey said. "Well, I'll tell you what then. How about we call this an offer for down the road when you're a little older? But if you still want to come in every so often and learn about movies, I'll talk to you about them. And if you want to do some stuff to help out, I can pay you with those free rentals. How's that sound?" Mr. Binford asked, with a hand outstretched to Joey. Joey stood there thinking. He liked the idea of being able to rent movies free of charge, and he was sure his parents would enjoy it too. He also liked Mr. Binford and liked that he might be able to learn more about movies. At the same time, though, he thought it would be weird working with the man who made his brother disappear and had apparently been using some creature to do the same for others. In any story that he had ever been told, that would make Mr. Binford a bad guy. Yet Joey could understand Mr. Binford's reasoning for doing it, and, if he was being honest with himself, felt a pull to wanting to be able to do the same. "Could I ask for an extra way of being paid?" Joey asked. Mr. Binford chuckled. "Only 7 years old and already negotiating for pay. What do you have in mind?" Joey looked the old man in the eyes. "Well, could you teach me about, this magic of yours?" Mr. Binford smiled widely. "My boy, I would gladly do that." Joey smiled in return and took Mr. Binford's hand with his. "Then you have a deal."
Did you hear that? Better check the locks on your doors. Weekly Spooky will be right back.
9 years later. Joey stood behind the counter of Binford's video, organizing tapes that had been recently returned. Mr. Binford sat on a stool behind him, rewinding tapes. Now 16 years old, Joey had been officially working at the store for about 2 years. Up until that point, Joey would go into the store once a week to help Mr. Binford with some odd tasks and talk movies with him, along with learning other nuggets of information. Surprisingly, his parents were okay with him having a job, his father even saying it made sense as he too had worked as early as 8 years old with a paper route. The only thing they probably didn't enjoy was the love of collecting films Joey now had. Mr. Binford once said he had become quite the cinephile, and it certainly showed in his bedroom that had become cramped with a TV, VCR, laserdisc player, and shelves and stacks of videotapes, laserdiscs, and books about film, as well as walls that were covered with posters. The bell on the door rang, letting the two know they had a customer. "Welcome to Binford's video," Joey started to greet before stopping mid-sentence. A group of teenagers had walked in, and it was a group Joey knew well. They were a bunch of kids from his class in high school, mostly a mix of quote-unquote cool kids. Leading the pack was a wrestler named Fred Tennyson and his girlfriend Cameron Collins. Joey was frequently bullied by most of the kids in the group, but was tormented the most by Fred. If a person could name the things a typical bully would say and do to somebody, Fred had done them to Joey. The animosity stemmed from Joey being labeled a weirdo, but Joey knew it was most likely due to the fact that he had a crush on Cameron. For every bit of bad Fred was, Cameron was that good. "Hey there, it's the film fairy," Fred called out to Joey. The kids laughed, save for Cameron. She gave Joey a small smile and a wave. "What do you want, Fred?" Joey asked in as flat and annoyed a tone as he could. "A movie. Duh," a kid said mockingly. "Didn't know you were that stupid, Josephine," another taunted. "Don't give me shit, McGee. I don't want to be here either, but Blockbuster and Hollywood Video didn't have what we wanted. So unluckily for me and you, we came here," Fred explained. He matched Joey's tone, but with the upped ante of getting in his face. Well, then get whatever it is you want and get out. I don't have time for your bullshit, Joey countered. Behind him, Mr. Binford turned his head to the conversation behind him. Fred gave Joey a push before he, Cameron, and the rest of their group headed to a wall of new releases. Mr. Binford joined Joey at the counter and watched the group with him. What was that all about? He asked his young employee and friend. Oh, just some blowhards from school, Joey told him. They give you trouble? Always. Well, all of them but one, Joey said as he pointed to Cameron. Mr. Binford smiled at Joey. Is she somebody that you're sweet on? Joey blushed and smiled a little. I wish. You should tell her sometime, Mr. Binford told Joey. I can't. She's taken by Fred, the guy I had in my face, Joey explained. And that means you can't at the very least talk to her? Mr. Binford asked. Pretty much. She's off limits unless I want to get put in an early grave. The two return their attention to the group. They watch as Cameron pulls a movie off of the shelf and shows it to Fred. Unable to hear them, Joey can only make an educated guess as to what was being said, but was able to clear as day see that she said or did something to tick Fred off. The next thing the two clerks knew, they were watching as the two started to have an argument that ended with Fred shooing his friends away. Believing that no one was watching, Fred smacked Cameron with the tape she had picked out. Joey clenched his hands into tight fists at the scene. It was not the first time he had observed how Fred treated her when he believed no one was paying attention. Mr. Binford watched the scene unfold in front of him and how his protege was reacting. You never know, Joey. Things change. Sometimes people are into something one day and then simply forget about it the next, Mr. Binford explained, he giving Joey a pat on the back. Joey looked at his mentor, a small smirk on his mouth. Excuse me, geezer and nerdorama. The two returned their attention to the counter. It was Fred with a movie in hand. You found what you're looking for, son? Mr. Binford asked. Finally, Fred said in his usual gruff fashion. Well, I'll get you checked out while Joey here makes sure the movie's been rewound, Mr. Binford tells the teen. Yeah, just make it snappy, all right? Fred told the two before shoving the movie into Joey's hands. Joey turned around and headed for the tape rewinder. He slid the movie out of its case and popped it into the machine. As he watched the tape rewind, Mr. Binford's words echoed in his head. Sometimes people are into something one day, then they simply forget about it the next. Forget. Joey hung on that word. He thought back to everything Mr. Binford had taught him, both for movies and for what the two decided to refer to as extracurriculars. A grin formed across Joey's lips. He held a hand over the rewinder, and under his breath, he uttered a series of words in Latin that Mr. Binford had taught him. An all too important string of words Joey had learned about all those years ago. Once finished with the string of words, the tape rewinder stopped and popped open. Joey took the tape out and slid it back into its case. He returned to the register and placed it on the counter. That'll be $2.50 for the night, Joey tells Fred. Fred fishes the money out of his pocket and pushes it towards Joey before picking up the tape. As the two finish their transaction, Cameron and the other kids walk back up to Fred. Enjoy your movie night, Joey tells them. Whatever, freak, Fred said. Is it good? Cameron asked, in her always cheerful but matter-of-fact voice, a voice that Joey compared to Barbara Stanwyck. What do you mean? Joey replied. The movie. Is the movie any good? She asked him again. Joey smiled at her. Yeah, I think you'll like it. That doesn't tell us if it's good, dumbass, a kid said. Yeah, you only said she'd like it. What about the rest of us? Fred questioned. Oh, don't worry. You have my word that it's something "You'll never forget," Joey told them, with his best customer service smile. "Whatever," Fred said, before he and the others head towards the door. Mr. Binford stood beside Joey, whose smile was turning into a smirk. "What you thinking about, my boy?" he asked Joey. "Oh, just something my father used to tell me." "What was that?" "Garbage in?" Joey started as the bell to the door rang as the group of teenagers left the video store, the door closing behind them. "Garbage out." Well, my spookies, I hope you enjoyed this terror tale, and be aware, there are 4 more novellas for your listening displeasure as October continues to unwind. So, make sure you're subscribed. You won't want to miss it. Also, I want to mention on Friday we have a very special Halloween-flavored story from our good buddy Michael Kelso. Don't miss it, or you'll regret it. And speaking of regrets, if you miss out on all the exclusive content we have over at Patreon, you're certainly going to be filled with regrets, because for as little as $1 a month, you get 2 bonus shows every single month and 4 years of back catalog as well. So, if you want to join and support us in a very direct way, head to weeklyspooky.com/join and stand side by side with 105 other spookies in supporting the show to make sure that we bring you the spooky on the weekly and beyond for another 6 years and far more to come. It really makes a huge difference and helps us keep the show going. And speaking of our Patreon backers, I want to say an extra special thank you to our Patreon podcast boosters, folks who pay just a little bit more to hear their names at the end of the show. And they are Johnny Nix, Jenny Green, Amber Hansford, Brent McCullough, Karen Weemet, Jack Kerr, and Craig Cohen. Thank you all so much. And if you want to hear your name at the end of every episode of Weekly Spooky, just head to weeklyspooky.com/join and sign up at the $15 a month tier or higher. You get all the other benefits, as well as hearing your name out of my silky, spooky voice. But now, my friends, it's time for me to get back to work. There's so much content to release for you all, and I really appreciate you tuning in. So for myself, for my producer Dan Wilder, my executive producers Mark Shields, Rob Fields, and Bobbletopia.com, and our composer Ray Mattis, I will talk at you tomorrow.
Thank you for listening. Make sure to find your way back next week. But for now, you are safe. Trust me.